A teacher mocks an overweight black student in science class, unaware he's the smartest mind in the school. What happens next will leave you speechless. Marcus Bell sat silently in the back corner of his high school science classroom, his thick glasses reflecting the harsh fluorescent light above. He tried to shrink into the worn-out fabric of his jacket, a secondhand relic that had long since lost its original color. The classroom hummed with the noise of the other students, the sound of pencils scratching across paper and the occasional chuckle from someone who thought they were clever. He didn't mind the noise as much as the looks, the whispers that followed him everywhere, the eyes that darted toward him when they thought he wasn't paying attention. At 15, Marcus was already used to being ignored. His size, his quiet nature, his thick glasses, everything about him screamed easy target to the other kids. But it wasn't just his appearance that made him the subject of their jokes. It was the way he carried himself. He was an outsider in every sense. His clothes were always a size too big, his shoes worn down at the heels from years of use. His notebook was his closest companion, and the only place where he truly felt like he belonged. It was filled with scribbled notes and equations, lines of text that most people wouldn't have understood, but it was his escape from the daily ridicule. He glanced up at Mr. Lawson, the science teacher, who was standing at the front of the class, talking about atoms and molecules with a level of enthusiasm that seemed completely out of place in this dreary room. Marcus could hear the laughter in the background, the kids whispering about his clumsy nature and his lack of social skills. Some of the teasing was subtle, others more direct. Derek, one of the popular kids, often made a point to mock Marcus in front of the class. Today was no different. Derek turned around in his seat, giving Marcus a smirk before calling out, "Hey Marcus, what do you think? If we add a little extra weight to a molecule, does it get smarter? Or does it just get bigger like you?" The class erupted in laughter, and Marcus could feel the heat rise in his cheeks. He didn't respond. He never did. It was easier that way. Words never seemed to work in his favor. Mr. Lawson chuckled along with the students, clearly not realizing that his own participation in the mockery was just another thorn in Marcus's side. "Come on, Marcus, don't take it personally," Mr. Lawson said, oblivious to the damage his words caused. "Science isn't for everyone. Some brains just aren't wired for it." The words hung in the air like an insult wrapped in a fake smile. Marcus forced himself to keep his eyes on his notebook, gripping the pen tightly as if it were the only thing that could keep him from losing control. His fingers tingled with the urge to snap back, to let the words flow out and shut everyone up, but he couldn't. He had learned early on that responding only made things worse. It only gave them more ammunition to fire. As the class went on, Marcus retreated deeper into his mind. His mother's journals were tucked safely in his backpack, their edges fraying with age. She had been a mathematician, a brilliant woman who had died when Marcus was just 9. But her work, the complex formulas and theories she had written down in her meticulous handwriting, had been left behind as a legacy. His father, a mechanic who had never seen the inside of a classroom but knew the value of hard work, had helped him see that patience and precision were the true marks of a skilled mind. It was in those late-night hours, when the world was quiet and the rest of his family was asleep, that Marcus would study. He had spent years teaching himself advanced physics and engineering, poring over textbooks from the library's discard pile. He understood concepts that many of his classmates, Mr. Lawson included, couldn't even begin to grasp. But he couldn't share any of that. It wasn't safe. His father had warned him that if anyone found out what he was capable of, they would try to take it away. They would see him as a threat, and that would be the end of his freedom. Marcus sighed, closing his notebook as the bell rang, signaling the end of class. He shuffled out of the room, his head down, his heart heavy. The hallway was no better than the classroom. His classmates brushed past him without a second thought, some muttering insults under their breath. It didn't matter. They couldn't see what he saw. They couldn't understand what he was capable of. But he had a plan. He wasn't going to let them win, not this time. His goal had always been simple: to win the state science fair, to prove to everyone, especially himself, that he was more than the jokes, more than the teasing. He wanted to show them that he was a genius, and that he didn't need anyone's approval to make his dreams a reality. But the road to that victory was filled with obstacles. The science fair was coming up in a few weeks, and Mr. Lawson had made it clear that only a select few students would be allowed to enter. Of course, those students were the ones with money, the ones whose parents were doctors or engineers. They were the ones with the shiny projects, the ones who could afford the best materials and had the support of the school behind them. Marcus was none of those things. But that didn't matter. He had something they didn't: knowledge, skill, and an idea that could change everything. He had been working on an invention for over a year now, something that could revolutionize the way energy was produced and consumed. A self-powered generator that didn't rely on fossil fuels or electricity. An invention that could solve a huge problem for the world. But it wasn't finished yet, and without the resources of the school or any guidance, it was going to be a challenge to get it to work. Marcus walked through the school's empty halls, his footsteps echoing off the lockers as he thought about how he could enter the science fair without the school's backing. He couldn't just show up with an incomplete project and expect to be taken seriously. He needed more. He needed help. But who could he turn to? As he walked toward the robotics lab, an idea began to form in his mind. He had access to the lab late at night when everyone else had gone home. Maybe he could work there, refine his generator, perfect it. But there was one problem. The lab was locked after hours. He needed a key. And that's when he saw Mr. Harris, the janitor, walking down the hall with his mop in hand. Mr. Harris had been a former engineer before life had knocked him down. Now, he spent his days cleaning up after the students. His once promising career reduced to sweeping floors and scrubbing windows. But Marcus had seen him work on a broken vending machine once, fixing it with the skill and precision of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. "Hey, Mr. Harris," Marcus said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Harris looked up, his tired eyes softening when he saw Marcus standing there. "What's up, kid?" I need to work on a project in the robotics lab," Marcus said, his voice faltering. "But it's locked after school, and I don't have the key. I was wondering if maybe—" Mr. Harris raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into a faint smile. "You're a smart kid, Marcus. You're better than all those jokers in there. What's the project?" Marcus hesitated for a moment before answering. "It's an energy generator, a self-powered one." Mr. Harris stared at him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a slow nod, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of keys. "I'll let you in," he said. "But you better not let anyone see you working in there. You don't want the wrong people to know about your talent." Marcus's heart swelled with gratitude. For the first time in a long time, someone believed in him. He nodded quickly, then took the keys from Mr. Harris. "Thanks," he said, his voice full of sincerity. "Don't mention it," Mr. Harris replied, before walking away, leaving Marcus to contemplate the next steps of his journey. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, Marcus felt like he was on the verge of something big, something that would change everything. The weeks leading up to the science fair were some of the hardest that Marcus had endured in his young life. Each day felt heavier than the last. The classroom, once just a place to learn, had become a battleground, a place where his intelligence was both unnoticed and mocked. Mr. Lawson, the science teacher, had announced that he would personally choose which students could represent the school in the upcoming science fair. Marcus, who had spent months developing his idea for the fair, had hoped for a chance. But as the days wore on, he began to understand that he wasn't even a consideration. The golden boys of the class, the ones with the powerful fathers, the bright smiles, the pristine school uniforms, had already been chosen to present their projects. It wasn't that Marcus lacked the ability. He knew that. He had been working on his invention for over a year, a self-powered energy generator that could run without any external fuel. It was a concept that no one had truly mastered yet, and he believed it was the breakthrough that could change everything. But to Mr. Lawson, Marcus was invisible, his potential dismissed as nothing more than a pipe dream. It was in the midst of this frustration that Derek, a classmate who always seemed to have something cutting to say, decided to make a joke. It wasn't a new joke. It wasn't particularly clever. But in that moment, It felt like a punch straight to Marcus's gut. "Hey, Marcus," Derek called out during a group presentation. "Maybe you should be a test subject for gravitational pull experiments, huh? With that size of yours." The classroom erupted in laughter. Even Mr. Lawson, who should have known better, chuckled. Marcus could feel the heat rising in his face, could feel his body trembling with the anger he refused to express. His fists clenched tightly under the desk, nails digging into his palms. He had no words, no defense to offer, no way to strike back. His silence, though, spoke volumes because the entire room had just witnessed him retreat into himself, into the weight of everything that had been said about him, everything that he had heard his entire life. For a moment, he wondered if the ridicule would ever stop. If it was truly possible for someone like him, someone who didn't fit in, who didn't have the right name or the right background, to ever make a mark. But then the bell rang, and the mockery faded into the background noise of lockers slamming shut and students talking over one another. No one paid attention to the quiet kid in the corner. No one noticed Marcus Bell. That night, Marcus sat in his room, his notebooks spread out before him. His mother's journals lay open on the desk, the pages full of complex theories and formulas she had once written in the calm of late nights just like this one. His father's tools were scattered across the table, wrenches, screwdrivers, pieces of machinery that no one else would ever use. It was here, in the quiet of his small room, that Marcus found solace. He thought of his project, of the generator that could change the world. But he also thought of the science fair, the one he wouldn't be a part of. It was time to take matters into his own hands. "I don't need their approval," Marcus muttered to himself. His voice was quiet, but there was strength behind it. "I'll do this on my own." And so, the next night, Marcus snuck into the school's robotics lab after hours. The halls were dark, the school eerily quiet, but the lab was open. The doors were always unlocked, a forgotten part of the school where nobody bothered to look anymore. The moment he stepped into the lab, Marcus's heart raced. He'd been here before, but never like this, never with a purpose so clear in his mind. The air smelled of metal and oil, of machines that hadn't been touched in years. He set to work immediately, pulling the parts he needed from the forgotten corners of the room. He used the materials that others would have overlooked, the tools that had been neglected. This wasn't just about making a generator, it was about proving that he was more than just the punchline of someone's joke. It was about showing the world that he had something real to offer. Marcus had always been good with his hands, had always understood the mechanics of things, the way parts fit together, how the smallest adjustments could make a machine hum to life. But this project, this was different. It was a leap of faith. It wasn't just a science experiment. It was the culmination of everything he had learned from his father's tools and his mother's books. Night after night, Marcus worked alone in the robotics lab, his mind focused, his hands steady. The lab was his refuge, the only place where he didn't feel the weight of the world pressing down on him. The project came together piece by piece, connecting wires, adjusting the circuits, testing the generator's output. There were setbacks, of course. It wasn't perfect. He had to keep tweaking, rethinking, starting over at times. But with every failure, he grew more determined. He knew that this wasn't just about building a machine, it was about building his future. It was during one of these long nights, as Marcus sat hunched over a workbench, that he heard a soft knock at the door. He froze. Who could it be at this hour? Slowly, he walked toward the door and cracked it open. Standing there was Mr. Harris, the janitor. "Everything all right in here?" Mr. Harris asked, his voice low and cautious. He had seen Marcus entering the lab before, but had never asked why. Tonight, something seemed different. "Yeah," Marcus said, swallowing his surprise. "I'm just working on something." Mr. Harris nodded slowly, glancing down at the array of parts and the nearly finished generator on the bench. His eyes widened for a moment, but he didn't say anything. "You need help, Mr. Harris asked, his tone soft, as though he knew the answer but was hesitant to speak it aloud. Marcus hesitated for only a moment. There was something about Mr. Harris, a quiet understanding, a shared sense of solitude, that made him feel comfortable. "Actually, yeah," Marcus said, a hint of gratitude in his voice. I could use a hand. It wasn't long before Mr. Harris's skills as a retired engineer came to light. Together, they worked side by side in the quiet of the lab, refining the generator. Mr. Harris didn't ask questions. He simply supported Marcus, offering suggestions and advice when needed. The work became easier with him by his side. They didn't talk much, but the bond they formed was undeniable, a mentor and a protege, both connected by a love for something bigger than themselves. But even with Mr. Harris's help, Marcus knew that the real test was still ahead. The science fair was only days away, and he had to find a way to present his project in front of a room full of people who would laugh at him, dismiss him just like they always had. He wasn't sure what would happen when he stood in front of the judges. Would they mock him too? Or would they finally see him for what he truly was, a genius who had been overlooked, undervalued, and underestimated? One thing was certain: he was ready to show the world who Marcus Bell truly was. But first, he had to survive the presentation. And that, he knew, was going to be the hardest part of all. The morning of the science fair arrived like any other, but for Marcus Bell, it felt like a ticking clock, each second counting down to the moment of truth. He stood at the edge of the bustling gymnasium, clutching the battered case containing his invention. His heart raced, a mix of nerves and anticipation swirling inside him. This was it, the moment he had been working toward for years. He had spent countless nights alone, poring over textbooks and scribbling equations, driven by a single, burning goal: to prove them all wrong. To show everyone that he was more than the quiet, overweight kid they mocked. The gym was alive with noise. Students chattered nervously as they set up their projects, showcasing their polished displays, colorful boards with flashy slogans, models of rockets, and neatly organized experiments. Marcus glanced around, his fingers tightening around the strap of the case. He had none of that. His project wasn't pretty. It wasn't shiny or polished. But it was real. "Hey, Marcus!" A voice called out behind him. It was Derek, the class clown. Derek's laugh was always loud, like a bark. "What's that? A toaster? You planning to power the whole school with it?" His laughter was followed by the snickers of a few other students. Marcus ignored them, choosing instead to focus on setting up his machine. He couldn't afford to let their words get to him. Not now. Mr. Lawson, the science teacher, passed by, his eyes flicking to Marcus's setup. He barely registered it before turning to one of the golden boys, the children of doctors and engineers, and complimenting their projects. "Looking good, gentlemen. This is what the future of science looks like." Marcus held back a sigh, feeling the familiar sting. He'd long ago accepted that he wasn't part of the teacher's inner circle. Mr. Lawson, in particular, always seemed to take pleasure in pointing out Marcus's flaws, commenting on his weight, his quietness, and, most hurtful of all, his potential. The clock ticked down to the start of the presentations. Marcus's project was small, just a basic metal frame with wires snaking in and out, but it held the promise of something far greater than the flashy displays around it. His self-powered energy generator, which he had perfected with the help of Mr. Harris, was his ticket to something more than ridicule. It was his shot at proving that genius doesn't need a fancy exterior. When it was time to present, Marcus stepped forward, his palms sweaty. The judges were seated in front of him, looking over their notes, glancing at their watches. They barely acknowledged him as he set up. His machine hummed quietly as he plugged it in. Mr. Lawson, who had taken his place as the head judge, gave him a once-over. His lips curled into a barely concealed sneer. "Well, let's see what this project can do," he said with mock enthusiasm, crossing his arms. Marcus felt the weight of the moment. His hands shook slightly, but he fought to keep his composure. This was the culmination of years of hard work, and he wouldn't let it slip away now. "Watch closely," he muttered under his breath. He flipped the switch. The room fell silent. First, there was nothing. No dramatic flash, no loud whirring sound, just a soft hum as the machine's internal components began to work. Then, without warning, the industrial lights lining the walls flickered on. One by one, they burst into full brightness. But there was no visible power source. The judges leaned in, their curiosity piqued. Murmurs rippled through the audience. "How is this possible?" One of the judges, a middle-aged man with thinning hair, whispered, his eyebrows furrowing. "This shouldn't be happening." Marcus's heart beat faster, but he didn't let it show. He took a deep breath and began to explain the science behind the generator. The words flowed from him with precision, his voice steady and clear, despite the shock of being the center of attention. He spoke of quantum mechanics, energy efficiency, and sustainable power, concepts that most of the professors and teachers in the room didn't fully grasp. Marcus could see their confusion in their eyes, the way they looked at each other, trying to make sense of what was happening. Mr. Lawson's face turned pale. He glanced at the machine, then at Marcus, then back to the machine. He was silent for a moment, unable to speak, his usual bravado now replaced by disbelief. The other students, who had been laughing at Marcus just hours before, now sat with wide eyes, their mouths agape. As Marcus finished explaining the science behind his work, one of the judges, a distinguished woman with a short bob and sharp glasses, stood up and made her way toward the machine. She knelt down, inspecting it closely, as though seeing it for the first time. Her expression softened. Then she turned to the other judges and said, "This is revolutionary." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. Had she really said that? Revolutionary? Mr. Lawson looked at her, his eyes narrowing. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice sharp. The judge didn't reply immediately. She was too busy calculating, her mind racing as she tried to comprehend what she was witnessing. Then finally she spoke again. "I've never seen anything like this. This could change the way we think about energy. It's unlike anything I've encountered." Marcus stood frozen, his body rigid, as the full weight of the moment settled over him. He had done it. He had proven them wrong. The disbelief in the eyes of his classmates, the stunned silence of his teachers, it all felt like a victory. But there was more. The judge turned to him, a small smile on her lips. "Young man, we'd like to offer you a full scholarship to our university. I'd like to see where you can take this project with the right resources. The world is waiting for minds like yours." For a moment, Marcus couldn't breathe. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but now that it was happening, it was even more surreal than he'd thought. He looked over at Mr. Lawson, whose face had gone from pale to red, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The other students, once eager to mock him, now stared at him with wide, shocked eyes. Derek, the boy who had teased him earlier, was silent, his gaze lowered in shame. But Marcus didn't gloat. He didn't need to. His victory wasn't about showing them up. It was about proving to himself that he was more than the boy they saw on the surface. He was someone who had built something that could change the world. He packed his machine carefully, his hands steady now. Mr. Harris, who had been watching from the back of the room, gave him a nod of approval. Without a word, they both walked out of the gym, leaving behind the stunned silence of the room. Marcus knew that this was just the beginning. The real journey was only starting. Disclaimer: the story you've just watched is fictional, created to highlight issues of body shaming, racial bias, and the importance of recognizing and nurturing the potential in every student. Its purpose is to raise awareness, promote empathy, and encourage meaningful discussions about respect, inclusivity, and the transformative power of education.